Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It is early o'clock in the morning, and I know that, but I'm an early bird, and I'm an early bird with insomnia. So sometimes I get up really early and I just have ideas of things I want to talk about. And instead of trying to stifle that this morning, I figure I might as well watch it. I might as well actually do the stream. So I have my little coffee here. I have some quiche next to me, my little breakfast. I've taken a shower, so I'm fresh and clean for you this morning. If you don't get a chance to watch this while this is actually currently live, that's a-okay. It will stay up as a video on my channel. So I'll see you now or I'll see you later. Um, Excuse me. I'm also using a new microphone, so please do let me know how the sound is coming in. I have here, I just moved it closer. So this should be a little bit easier for you to hear me. But let me know. What's this? Okay, no, that wasn't it. All right. So I have some points that I just want to talk about. But surely you can tell by the thumbnail of this video. I have some thoughts on the recent Alec Murdaugh trial in South Carolina. Um, it's it was a trial that went on for about 2.5 weeks longer than it was intended to, and it was in case you don't know the story, everybody's been talking about it, so I assume that most people know. But the story is that this gentleman, Alex Murdaugh, which it's spelled Alex, but it's pronounced Alec, Alec Murdaugh, uh, has a long, sordid history in his area of South Carolina. His family has a long history in that area. And he's an established figure in the community. But he also is a criminal and has been doing crimes for a long time, allegedly related to finances, which he did end up admitting to in this trial. And then all of that seemed, according to the prosecution, to climax into this moment where those ongoing financial crimes of him stealing from his clients who were often victims of really terrible circumstances, those were approaching being exposed. So he decided rather than face the shame of that, that he would unalive, let's say, his wife and his one of his sons in a very gruesome manner, to be honest. Um, so that was the prosecution's case, and they ran with it. And the defense that Alec put up was, I'm such a good dad, such a good, kind dad, a good, kind person. I would never do such a thing. And they were also trying to poke holes in the events of exactly like the timeline of how that would have gone down according to the evidence that was gathered by the state. Um, it didn't work. He ended up being convicted, and it was a very captivating trial, and I think that's the first thing that I want to speak to. I I was definitely captivated by it. It drew a lot of my attention. Um, because I personally found it very interesting, the kind of the social element of it with Alex's status in his town, how that impacted the way that the police behaved around him and did their investigation of this event, and the way that that played out in people's testimonies, and even the way that he comported himself within the courtroom, and kind of how he expected the trial would work. He seemed to believe that people around him and believe what he says because he says so, not necessarily because of anything other than his own reputation. Um, Sorry, I'm just gonna really quickly do a quick technical thing on my end. And why is this unlisted? Hello. Why is this unlisted? Hello. I might have just messed up my stream. That's fun. Let me make sure that I didn't just accidentally unlist my stream. Because that would be a problem. I did, and now it's not unlisted anymore. Okay, sorry. There was one place that I forgot to share the stream to. Okay. So there's a lot of like Southern culture, Southern small town politics, inner politics that I found very interesting as a Northeasterner, not part of that. I found it very interesting the way that the courtroom in and of itself, like the way that the lawyers behaved amongst themselves, there was an astounding overall lack of objections when there was ample opportunity for objections to be objected, and I found that very interesting, and the strategic nature of when somebody did object, what that meant, and did that maybe draw the jurors' attention to that factoid more rather than doing what an objection is supposed to do, which is suppress that information from coming into the jurors' minds. They're not supposed, they're objecting, they're saying that shouldn't be, the jurors shouldn't hear that, essentially, and then explaining why. um Good morning. So I found that extremely interesting. um and overall, as it turns out that Alec was found guilty, um I have to there's a couple things I want to comment on. First of all, I do enjoy watching powerful white men who control police departments being dethroned. I do like that kind of thing. I also think that his family dynasty becoming less, I don't know, ingrained in the in the little town, the little area where they live. I think that's an important thing as well. um but I also think that something that was evident in the commentary, which I wanted to address, I have like notes too. Oh, hi people. There's people here. Hi. Say yo in the comments in the chat. Let me know where you're coming in from. I want to see who else is awake as early as me. Anyway, um so I was watching the trial via watching LawTubers streams. And what's interesting when you're watching a legal, a trial through the lens of lawyers is the way that they commentate on it is going to be very different than how we perceive the trial. And they're there to offer insight and offer education, and it's very valuable listening. Oh, hello. Hi in Japan. Wow. So this is just a nice bedtime stream for you. Um but I think that what's important and that what law tubers and lawyers sometimes forget is that jurors don't think the way that lawyers do. And I feel like when I watch these trials, I'm often watching the way that a juror would, because I try my best. I did this with the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial as well. I try my best to put myself in the shoes of a juror where I'm not receiving, like, there were TV specials about this, there's tons of articles, there was tons of stuff on social media, and I was trying my best not to read that stuff. And of course, in this case, by watching the trial alongside lawyers, I was getting their analysis and their educated input. So it's definitely different. Oh, good morning, everyone. Hey, I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm using a new microphone. Can you let me know how it sounds? Because I can adjust if needed. Um, so I think that sometimes, like, a lot of law tubers were a bit confused or like surprised by the verdict going guilty in this case. Whereas I felt for a while before the case, like before the jury went to deliberate, I was like, yeah, it kind of makes sense that he's the only one with the opportunity and the means, regardless of what you think the motive may have been, because I know that was a big sticking point with the financial stuff. But even without all of that, um, the the biggest sticking point with me was the Snapchat video of, basically, if you don't know the overall story, I gave a very broad overview at the start, but the events of the day of the crime were Alex Alec Murdaugh summoned his son and his wife to this property called Moselle that they own, which is like a hunting property. I don't exactly know what that means, but it's like 1,700 acres of land, and they have a house, and they have like probably at the end of like 3 or 4 acres away, there's a set up with like these kennels for their hunting dogs, and they have, I don't know, it's just like some buildings. It's some rich people shit. I don't know. So they go sometimes at night to not night, the evening. They go out to visit the hunting dogs and to, take care of their land. I don't know. They have chickens and guineas out there as well. So they all arrived to the house that evening. They had dinner, and the biggest plot point that was a problem was, oh, it's okay. Yes, Bubba is a very good boy. Bubba is one of the hunting dogs. He becomes crucial in this moment we're about to talk about. Um, so the family gets together. Alec, his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul. They get together. They have dinner. I guess Maggie and Paul go to the kennels. Alex first said, I'm going to stay here and take a nap here at 8 p.m. I didn't know that was nap time, but I guess in the South it is. And then he was going to go with Maggie to visit his sick father. That was like the outline for the day. And so that's what he originally said that he did. After dinner, Maggie and Paul went to the kennels. He stayed and napped for like an hour, and then he got in his car and went over to visit his sick father. Before he left, he texted Maggie and said, "Hey, I'm going to visit Pops," whatever. He went, visited, came back, and then just found his wife and his son dead near the kennels. Oh, what a shock and a surprise. What he later admitted to, after being forced into a corner by a Snapchat video that his son Paul had taken, was that indeed he did not take an hour-long nap at 8 p.m. When Maggie and Paul went to the kennels, he also went up to the kennels, and they were there, having a final family time, talking to the dogs, hanging out, whatever, for a while. Paul was using social media. Um, he was taking a few Snapchats. He was also texting his friend Rogan about Rogan's dog, who he was caring for at the time, had some sort of issue with his tail. There was like a bend in his tail that he didn't really understand. So he was taking a video of it to send to his friend Rogan. And that was at 8:44 p.m., just a few minutes before the murders were essentially found to have happened. So in that Snapchat video, while Paul is recording the dog named Cash, who has like this nick in his tail that he doesn't understand, you can hear the conversation between Maggie and Alec going on in the background. So Alec was there. Instead of taking a nap from 8 to 9, he was at 8:44 present at the kennels. Um, and in that conversation, you hear him say Bubba because he's trying to corral one of their hunting dogs named Bubba, who had a chicken in his mouth, because I guess chickens are toys for hunting dogs. Makes sense. It's whatever. So he says multiple times, Bubba, Bubba, come here, Bubba, because he's trying to get the chicken out of his mouth and hopefully save the chicken. I don't think it ended up working. And then that Snapchat video lasts like 45 seconds. And then that's right after that ends is when we can assume, based on the timeline, that that's within the next 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, is when Alex, the only person there who had access to weapons, was convicted of shooting his wife and his son. Like I said, for a long time, he told this story where he was never even up there at the kennels that night. He was taking a nap and he didn't hear the shots because he had the TV on loud. And then he just, even though he had planned on going to visit his dad with Maggie, he just decided to leave without her because, just because. So, after that Snapchat video was found with his voice repeatedly being there, and it's a distinct voice. He has this interesting high man voice. Let me know in the comments below if that voice sounds like anybody else you've ever heard before, because to me, I've only ever heard a voice like that from Alex Murdaugh. Murdaugh. I've never heard anybody else sound like him. So they didn't even argue that it wasn't him because it's such a distinct voice. So once he was confronted multiple times and a million witnesses confirmed that's a video at 8:44 when Alex said that he was napping, he is actually recorded being at the kennels moments before they were killed. Sorry, I'm trying like to censor myself and think of ways to censor myself so that YouTube doesn't hate me, but like whatever. The YouTube already hates me. It's fine. I just want to see what you guys are up to. Thank God Paul took that Snapchat video. I think he would have been convicted either way, but it really pushed him to admit he lied. I don't know if he took the stand or not. If not for the kennel video, taking the stand edited it for him. Yes. Okay, so here's the thing. Like I said, so every witness was asked about this Snapchat video. For me, what pushed me to beyond a reasonable doubt before Alec even testified, because that is not something that people typically would do, is have the defendant who's charged of murder testify about it, because there's just a lot of ways to attack that person. That Snapchat video was the linchpin is the word that's coming to mind for me. It was what pushed me beyond a reasonable doubt. Hi, Moxie. Because I didn't need to hear Alex testify, because for so long he had lied about where he was during that time. The Snapchat video showed that he was actually there, even though he said he wasn't. I didn't need to hear him get on the stand and tell me why he was actually there, oops, or why he wasn't actually there and the video is wrong or whatever. I'm like, this is incontrovertible evidence. Like, I don't know what to tell you, dude. Like, sorry, there's nobody else that makes any sense to have known that Maggie and Paul were gonna be there at the time, to have had weapons, which, by the way, they narrowed it down to being weapons that were owned by the family, not weapons that somebody else brought onto the property with them because they were, like, vigilantes that wanted to just come mess with the Murdaughs. Um, so somebody who knew that Maggie and Paul would be at that location at that time by the kennels, brought family guns with them somehow, obtained guns from the gun room without being noticed, um, was able to commit the murders without being noticed by Alec, who was either napping or running back and taking a very short nap. Um, I don't love Creighton as a prosecutor, but one of my favorite lines was that it was the shortest nap in the history of the South, if we believe Alec's story. Because once he was confronted with the Snapchat video, he had to change his story to, "Oh, right, after dinner, silly me, I forgot, or I, like, got scared of the police who are under my thumb, and I forgot to say, um, at first I didn't go to the kennels because I was pouting because, like, I didn't want to, and then I was like, well, happy wife, happy life, and so because Maggie had asked me to, I went to the kennels. I was there for, like, 5 minutes while Paul recorded me on a video, so I don't know why I went there because I didn't do anything. And then I went back to the house, and then I took the shortest nap in the history of the South while they were being killed, so I didn't hear them being killed. And then I went to my dad's house. Yeah, that's how that happened. Or his mom's house, actually, sorry. Which also doesn't make any fucking sense because he said that he came home because his dad was in the hospital, or he, like, wanted everybody to come to like, he asked Maggie to come to visit his dad in the hospital. He ended up going to his mom's house. So, yeah, there's just constantly hypocrisy in my brain. So, I say all of this to say, like, I think sometimes lawyers do a little bit too much in terms of, like, trying to make their case, and it's their job to do that. But I think this distinction of proving that somebody is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, it's lawyers' job to think about that, but I think that a lot of times jurors kinda go with their gut. And my gut from the moment I saw the Snapchat video, was, well, damn, he did it. Because of the fact that he had previously lied, and during the trial, he had lied. Like, before he even got on the stand, through other people's testimony of them saying what Alec had told them, he had already lied about where he was at that time, and it's just kinda like, I don't know, dude. There's no reason you would lie about where you were at that time unless you were in a place you shouldn't have been, doing a thing you shouldn't have been doing. Um, so, um, it is absolutely the state's burden and their job to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. I think that jurors don't necessarily think to that level of specificity about the law. And I just think it's interesting watching these trials from the perspective through the lens of lawyers and LawTube, and hearing them debate, because there was huge debate about, like, I don't know, this jury is probably going to be hung. They're not going to find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, because there was this huge discussion of, like, well, what about what happened with Maggie's cell phone, and what about, like, this blue raincoat, and, like, all of these different things that, to me, I was like, what about them? I don't fucking care. Like, I don't care who put Maggie's phone on the side of the road. It doesn't change what happened at the kennels. I don't care whether there was a gun tarp or a gun raincoat. I don't. What does it matter? I don't. It doesn't change what happened at the kennels. Like, can we focus on? And, like, I understand bringing in the long history of Alex's financial crimes because it adds context to motive, which some people need. motive. Personally, I feel like killing people is almost never a logical answer. So working really hard to provide a motive for killing your wife and your son, you're never going to provide the right answer because it's not logical. Like, it's never logical. If anything, it's purely emotional. So again, with I feel like sometimes lawyers do a little too much and don't focus on what's really important. That testimony about all of the financial crimes could have at least been truncated if it was included. I don't think that it was detrimental. I don't think that it was a negative thing that it was included. I think there was legal grounds for it to be included once the defense opened the door. And I think for people who needed motive, it provided a motive. Because let me tell you guys, before I started watching this trial, I was on a whole true crime kick for a minute there. There's this channel called Dreading that I watched that I really like because it's simple. He just he reads files, he shows police body cam footage. He doesn't he doesn't try to make it too overproduced. He just tells you this is what happened. Yeah, Amber knows, Anne knows. Yeah. So there are so many stories from just that one channel, from what they've been able to report on, about people who, because they're about to be exposed, just off their families because they don't want to deal with the shame and the repercussions of those people finding out what they did. They're punishing other people for their own crimes, essentially. They don't see it that way in the moment, but it's they can't handle dealing with other people finding out about their shit, basically. So again, it's not logical. It's not that murdering Paul and Maggie would have solved his problems, which I think is what the defense was trying to say. How would that have solved his problems? It didn't. And that's not I don't think that's an argument that should have been given any credit, because I don't think that he thought it was going to solve his problems. But the problem it did solve was him getting exposed to those people that he loved the most, his wife and his son. If they were out of the picture, then they didn't have to know about all of the bad he was bringing, you know? So, yeah, let me get to the chat for a minute. I'm sure I'm in the middle of a sentence somewhere bad about that, but I just want to see what you guys are up to. Love Dreading. Yes, Dreading is a great channel. Desperate people will seriously do desperate things. Yes, yes. I just want to know what Buster is going to be up to now. Yes, Buster. Yeah, I don't okay. So at the end of the trial, Creighton threw in this argument. Hi, Midnight Void. Hi from Hawaii. I would love to visit, but I know you guys are having tourist problems. The Creighton, the prosecutor, who I'm going to go through all the lawyers, by the way, that's in my document, and give you some feedback on them. But Creighton brought up at the last minute this theory of are you a family annihilator? Did not define what that term means. Did not really give much to the jury as context for is that a legal term? Is that a colloquialism? What does that mean? I don't know. And the thing is, I feel like it's a theory that he came up with way late in the game and that he didn't have enough to go on. So he just wanted to throw it in there. And it doesn't really work in this case because Buster is still here. If he was a family annihilator, he would have also summoned Buster to Moselle and gotten rid of all three of them. So I don't like that he just threw that out there as like, well, what about this? And I'm like, what about it? I don't think that's the case here, boy. Like, what I stop, stop. You're doing too much. You're providing too many options for the jury, and a bunch of options creates reasonable doubt. And if you're the prosecutor, you don't want to cause more reasonable doubt. Um PS, like the stream, everybody. Um so as far as Buster definitely seems to be on his dad's side. He also has some stuff pending around him, and not necessarily against him. There's another death that happened that people are theorizing that either he was involved in or was like tangentially related to. I don't wanna go there because again, like that's I haven't kept up with a lot of the news and stuff around this trial because I'm really trying to give myself more of the jury experience than less, even though again, I did watch it through the lens of LawTube. So, they did influence a bit of my thoughts on it. But back to the context of LawTube, the lawyers that I watched were really like, "I don't know. I think this is gonna be a hung jury. I think this is gonna be, then they're not gonna be able to come to a decision. He's not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, because that's the standard. It's not just you have to think he's guilty, you have to think he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt." And that's a distinction that I think a lot of jurors might not make. I guess that's my point is like when you're intaking information on a trial like this, I don't know. I think it's better to just like because what I did with the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial is I just watched the videos on the Law and Crime Network with no commentary. I specifically did not observe any commentary. And then this time for this trial, I did watch it through the lens of LawTubers, live streaming, and commentating along the way. I feel like I enjoyed the experience of not having the commentary better because I felt more like a juror and I felt more, able to make my own decision. I think that law tubers I think that, it's absolutely valuable to watch at least one trial with law tubers there so that they can bring up the objections that should be being made that aren't being made and stuff like that so you can see what's going weird in how a trial is happening. But what I did with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard is I watched that trial first on Law and Crime with no commentary, and then I watched it the second time with commentary from like Emily D. Baker, Natalie Lawyer Chick, other law tubers. And I think that that was more interesting and helpful having the baseline be no commentary. Um, I think that maybe the next time if there's a trial going on that I'm interested in watching, I don't know. I've been debating streaming more. And I've also on this topic, every now and then I've been like, "Ooh, I wanna stream these 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 trials and like provide my uneducated opinion because I feel like a juror." And I feel like if people are wondering what the jury thinks, me, hi, I'm essentially a juror, so I could tell you, I don't have any special training. I'm not a lawyer, and I feel like I would give that perspective, but I don't know. Um, but yeah, I just thought that that was something that might might be a a, a point that's missing from the conversation sometimes is I want lawyers and law tubers and law tube watchers and people who tweet about it to understand that like you are a legal scholar. The rest of us aren't. So the way that you're seeing things is going to be different and I feel like they influence the conversation when they do it from an educational standpoint. Love that. When they do it from a standpoint of like allowing a lot of theories to fester that ultimately, like, just create a lot of frustration and tension. I don't know. And that might be beyond what I'm trying to say, but it's just like it because they're inputting a lot of legal theories and like, well, if I was the attorney, I would be arguing this. And I'm like, well, that's not helping me as a juror or as an observer decide if I think this person did this crime. At the end of the day, that's what a trial is about, is did this person kill these people, you know? And having the legal analysis of how this argument is structured kind of turns it into a game or like a sport, and there's teams and there's strategies and there's all this stuff that is interesting in a way, but at the same time it kind of removes you from the impact of these very serious things that we're discussing. And when, I was right, I guess, because I felt that he was guilty and the jury found him guilty. And I was like, okay, so I have a good compass on this for, do I feel like something has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt? Yes. Um, but it doesn't feel good to be right about this kind of stuff. Like it's not healing. It's not closure to be right about, yes, this father who is an absolute charmer, um, tricked everybody around him, killed his wife and his son. That doesn't feel good. So I think that when you turn it into like teams and sides and make bets on what the jury will choose and stuff, just feels a little bit like with a murder trial. It's kind of, I don't know. I think what I'm learning, at least through watching it that way, is I don't really like it. It's I think it's a, maybe for like an Amber Heard Johnny Depp defamation trial, teams all day. When it comes to murdering a wife and a son, gruesomely, I think that, that's what I'm learning is I'd rather not watch with the legal analysis and the gamesmanship and the strategies in my ear, because I don't know if it's beneficial, because ultimately whatever the jury decides, they are the finder of fact. So they're the ones who decide what's true. So it doesn't really matter what all of these alternate theories are and alternate strategies and whether or not he should have testified, he did testify. Whether or not they should have brought into the financial crimes, they did bring in the financial crimes. I don't know in the situation of certain crimes if it helps. I don't know. Let me see what you guys are saying. I think he snapped under the pressure of the consequences of his actions coming back to haunt him, and in his mind, his wife was making things insufferable for him. I can see that. And there was also this this theory or this like line of conversation that was brought in about his opioid use as well, which that was another thing similar to the Family Annihilator. They just like kind of sprinkled that in and didn't really like bring it all the way home. And I was like, why? What are you doing? Why are we just like bringing this up, but not really, not all the way? I don't. Weird. Poor Buster, he's either free from this murderous legacy family that will thrive, or the weight of all this trauma. Oh, and will thrive, sorry. Or the weight of all this trauma will crush him before he has the chance to figure out what's what and get help. Yeah. Yeah. It's tough because he really does seem to be on his dad's side and be believing him. it might, I don't know, his dad being found guilty might change that, but probably not. It will at least change how Buster sees the legal system, which his dad and his grandpa and his great grandfather and many generations have been part of and have made their career out of. Um, yeah, do not envy Buster. The theories sometimes overthrow fact and confuse me. Yes, I absolutely agree. Agree. It's not like a happy experience coming to that conclusion. Yeah. I leave most of those law tubers alone, honestly. I have a select few that I watched that I trust. Most of them are pretty awful on YouTube. I don't know their life. Fair. Um, I think I like watching when they're going through documents because it helps explain the language of legalese. I don't know about, um, trials, though. I'm still figuring out. I think what I'm learning from this is, like, depending on the topic of the trial, I may or may not be interested in watching with the live color commentary. But a lot of people really like it. Like, a lot of the super chats that people get is like, "Oh my god, I couldn't watch this trial without your commentary. Thank you so much." So I'm like, "Okay, if it helps some people, then God bless them." I just don't think for murder trials that it helps me, but that's just me. I haven't eaten any of my quiche. That's okay. I'll leave so I have time for breakfast. All right. I wrote some notes of stuff I wanted to make sure that I talk about. So I want to make sure that I talk about them. Um, Hello. Where is it? What the heck? Oh, got it. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to talk about each of the lawyers. I'm going to go through the defense team first and then the prosecution team because I think that was one of the things that stood out to me from this trial was the different lawyers, different personalities had a huge impact on how successfully their work was done in the trial and how successfully certain points were made or not made. Um, oh, you go to bed. I'm Thank you very much, Midnight Void. I'm doing this at a weird hour. It's fine. Have a good night. Sleep well. Um, as I said before, overall from both sides there was a weird lack of objections that I just don't understand. But what I've heard from people commentating is that it's a kind of South Carolina thing that people just don't really object much. It might be like a politeness thing that also extends into the courtroom. I'm not really sure. So, one of the defense lawyers was named Barber. He was usually the one who would cross examine their expert witnesses. He was, I think, the only defense lawyer with like a beard and mustache scenario going on. And he had this very like calm and peaceful way of talking. And he sounded very much like a math teacher at school. And he doesn't really get super emotional. Um, he was analytical in an approachable and logical way. He wasn't like hyper picking at, nitpicking on people's every single word. He was focused and smart without coming off as condescending. That was the most important part to me. He kept his cool against difficult witnesses, and he definitely had some, at least in chambers, difficult witnesses to deal with. And I think that he's a lawyer that I wish they had used him more because he was very easy to follow and he got his points across without coming off as a condescending son of a bitch, which leads me to Dick Harpootlian. Um, I want to say he was the lead defense lawyer for Alec Murdaugh. Um, Really, Alec Murdaugh, because he is a lawyer, I'm going to say that he was probably the lead defense lawyer, based on I'm sure that he had huge influence on what they did in that trial. Dick Harpootlian, whose nickname is Poot, so I'm gonna go ahead and call him Poot, was a condescending son of a bitch and the least subtle strategist I've ever seen. I have never seen someone so obvious in the way that they're trying to trick people. It's like, but wouldn't you consider me sneaky while I'm asking this question in this tone of voice? I'm like, what are you doing? You're not helping anybody. You're not helping your client. Um, I don't trust a word out of his mouth. He's very snaky. He's disrespectful to women in general, but especially expert witness Dr. Raymer. Um, Thankfully, he's not a very energetic person. He's a little bit older. He's, not somebody who seems to work out. So, after he had these really bold outburst kind of moments, or when he actually did object, it just took so much out of him that then he had to sit down and take his nap. So, I think in this case, the jury saw through him, thankfully. Um, and it was for the best. Hello. Um, what's also weird, like, so he did the opening statement from the defense, which is at the beginning of a trial, there'll be opening statements from the prosecution and from the defense where they talk to the jury. The prosecution says, hey, this is what we're putting this guy on trial for. This is what we think he did. Then the defense will come forward and say, hey, we think this guy did not do this. Here's a summary as to why. And it's honestly, as defense, it's not our job to prove he did not do it. It's our job to make the prosecution prove he did it. And if they can't, we're going to point that out. During that part of the speech, Poot was like, listen, I'm going to annoy some of you a lot. I'm going to piss y'all off because I'm obnoxious. But just don't hold it against my client. Hold it against me. And I'm like, bruh, that is not a good way to start. That is not a good relationship to build with this jury. If you're, just, I'm not a lawyer, but just advice. If you behave in such a way that that's how you have to preface your um, lawyering, is you guys might hate me, but just don't hold it against my client, okay? You might want to change what you're doing. I don't know, just me, because that might not work great for your client in the long run. It might work against your client. In this case, I really feel like it did because I feel like the jury saw through him. I also think that based on the press conference that the defense did at the very end, after all was said and done, after sentencing, which, by the way, he was sentenced to 2 life sentences in prison without parole after he was convicted. Um, somebody asked Poot, why did you have Murdaugh go on the stand? At first, I had thought that Alec really wanted to go on the stand. But I think watching that interchange about why they had Alec testify, I think that Jim, who we're about to talk about, Jim was not on board with Alec testifying. I think that Alec was probably in the middle. Poot was saying, I feel like based on what Poot said in the press conference, that he would have been the one who was like, you need to testify, you need to clear your name, because he kept saying, like, well, they were painting him as this man who does all of these bad things and steals from paraplegics and people who were disabled. He used a bad word for that, but and we needed him to get up there and prove his true character. And I'm like, but that's not painting him as anything. Those are real things that he did and that he admitted to. So that's your motivation? Because Alec never said that those things were not true. He got up there and admitted that they happened. So what's the point? If anything, you're putting yourself in hot water for future prosecution about those financial crimes. So don't do it. I don't know. Or that even that moment in the press conference could have been zealous advocacy where Poot was presenting what Alex really wanted. Maybe Alec really wanted to get on the stand and try to clear his character because he was being painted as whatever. And so Dick, by saying that in the conference, was being a zealous advocate, which is the job of the defense, and relaying Alec's opinions more than his own. I don't know, but I just don't think it was a good idea. Um, so Jim, I hated. No, sorry, Poot, I hated. Jim was in a tough spot because he was a family friend and he was very close to this whole situation. I don't think that he should have been on the defense team as a result. I but so like I don't have sympathy for him because it's like you chose to do this, to put yourself in this awful uncomfortable situation. You knew it was going to be awful and uncomfortable. Alec has money. He could have hired anybody. I don't know why it needed to be you. I don't know. So Jim, the biggest problem that I had with him was his closing argument. First of all, it was not an argument. It was essentially a rebuttal. There's a difference. A closing argument is when everybody, after they do the opening argument, they present their case, the jury is thrown a bunch of facts and evidence and witnesses, and everything is kind of disjointed. And then in the closing argument, you kind of pull everything back together into a neat little bow, and the prosecution restates, so now that you've seen all this evidence, here's what we think this evidence means, which is that this guy did this thing. And then the defense follows up with, you've seen all this evidence, and here's what we think it means, which is that this guy did not do this thing, and here's why. That is not what Jim did in his closing argument. Instead, he rebutted everything that was said in the prosecution's closing argument, which is the problem with that is the prosecution offers a theory, a storyline, some real, like, concise, clear, this is why Alec did this. He had the motive, he had the means, he had the opportunity, he had whatever is the fourth thing. And Creighton had an outline. He went through it multiple times. He talked about it in a much more clear, concise way in the closing than he ever had anywhere else, and left the jury feeling he made a compelling case. And instead of Jim making his own compelling case, he came up and was like, "But guys, that's not what this was wrong." He like sounded very whiny. He sounded very defeated. He sounded very like, "But you guys can't believe him. I mean, there is not what he said." And that's kind of just how he talks in general, but like it was a whiny closing argument. It was based much more on rebutting the prosecution than on making his own case or his own storyline or his own timeline of events, which I think was what the jury needed if they were going to not agree with the prosecution. They needed, well, what really happened according to you. And he didn't provide that. And then the last thing that Jim said in his closing argument, his final sentence before he like thanked the jury and went to sit down, was something along the lines of like, Alec didn't do this. Please don't compound this family tragedy by causing another one. Essentially meaning like convicting Alec for this crime that he did not do, in their opinion, would be compounding a family tragedy. So based on that, that really threw me off because it's like either he really believes that Alec did not kill his wife and son, despite all of the really convincing evidence, or he believes that Alec did do it. He was doing his job as a zealous advocate in that moment, but he also It sounded like what he was really saying basically was that Alec was such a valuable friend that he was willing to overlook all of that stuff to be Alec's friend, which I don't know why that would be the case, but whatever. And in that case, by saying, "Don't compound this family tragedy by creating another one," or whatever, he was kinda saying, "Don't compound my tragedy and my grief about losing Maggie and Paul, and make me also lose Alec." And it was just like, bro, I don't think that came out the way that you wanted it to, and I'm very confused about you. You need some counseling. This has obviously been a grief-filled process for you. And again, you shouldn't have been a lawyer on this case. I don't think that he has been able to separate himself from Alec and from these crimes a way that a lot of Alec's other cohort has been able to, because it seems that he was there since the beginning. And when he became part of the legal team, he locked himself in to the theory that Alec did not do it in way in advance of investigation and evidence coming out, and things that may have allowed him to receive other information and be have his mind be changed. When you're a zealous advocate and a defense attorney for your friend, you can't do that. And as a side note, yes, there were issues with the investigation of this. I am totally not saying that SLED was perfect here, nor that the local police were perfect here. Both of them highly flawed. However, what they were able to pick up, first of all, I do think that it was tampered with by Alec, because I do think that he did these crimes. Um, I also think that what they were able to pick up was enough still to put Alec at the scene of the crime with the weapon doing the thing. So it wasn't perfect, no, but I think they got what they needed to get, because there's no there's no other theory that makes sense, or that there was any evidence of. So anyway, that's the defense team, people that I wanted to comment on. Banker, Poot, and Jim. I'm sorry, Jim Griffin. Griffin is his last name. As for the prosecution team, the lead prosecutor was named Creighton, somebody Creighton. I don't know his first name. He he was focused like a hawk. He felt focused, analytical, smart, probably a little bit too perfectionist or completionist, which is why he really wanted the financial crimes to come in. But it was also a lot of repeating the same thing, which is in the legal term, it's called cumulative evidence. I think it could have been tapered down, distilled into maybe one or two very knowledgeable witnesses, instead of having a bunch of individual witnesses that each knew. Oh yes, Creighton Waters. Creighton is his first name. Thank you. Um, Creighton is his first name, last name Waters. Gotcha. So Mr. Waters. Um, I think that Creighton's best moment. Oh, sorry, but before I say that, I also think that the choice to bring in all of these different individual witnesses, each talking about their own individual financial crime, was to set up this thing that he talks about later on, about how we met all of these people that Alec was able to. He tried so hard to make this happen, and Alec would not let this happen. But he was trying to get Alec to say that he looked all these people in the eye and lied to them, so that then Creighton could say, "He's doing it to you, jury. He's looking you in the eye and he's lying to you." Um, Alec could see from a mile away, as could I or anybody, the strategy of like the sentence that Creighton was trying to pull out of his mouth, and Alec refused to say it. But because Alec isn't new here, he's also a lawyer. Anyway, um, but I think that was the only positive benefit to having all of those individual witnesses come forward and talk about their individual financial crime, was that you got to meet all of these different people that Alec had fucked over, and then say, well, if Alec could lie to them, why couldn't they lie to me as a jurist, a juror, or a audience member or whoever? Why couldn't he lie to his family if he could lie to his best friend and his most dedicated business partner and whoever, you know? I think that Creighton's best moment was the closing argument because he had a specific outline, 4 points, motive, means, opportunity, some other one that I keep forgetting. And he would say the outline, he would go through that point. Say the outline again, go through that point. I don't know if you know in the comments below what was the 4th point. I keep forgetting. Yeah. And then I think that that was good for him in terms of just getting his point across to the jury that, like, what was missing from the trial was an overall timeline from the prosecution until the very end. The last person that they had testify was, I think, was a timeline guy who, but like, if you have the timeline at the beginning and then you add in all these witnesses and all this evidence and all these facts and stuff, it's easier to understand what exactly you're looking at when it comes to you. When you do the timeline at the very end, then you have to retroactively go back through and try to remember, oh, now I get why this person said this thing and this evidence had to do with this and blah, 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 blah. But if these jurors weren't even allowed to take notes, like they didn't have a photographic memory of every single thing that everybody had said. So that's why you start out with the timeline, you start out with the context so that as you go along, it makes a little more sense instead of having to try to retroactively doing it at the end. You know, that's just me. But he did a good job with that in his closing argument. I think that eventually he did tie up the loose ends. It was just messy, fucking messy. I think that he could have been more likable. I think he could have done more to humanize himself a little bit. And as I mentioned before, I wish that he did not throw in the family annihilator thing at the very end. Random as hell and not explained, not given any context, not I just out of nowhere, man. And I don't bad idea, bad move. And more unanswered questions, untied up ends is more ways to cause reasonable doubt. And you don't want that as a prosecutor, one would think. Another prosecutor was named Metters. He was a more he was a less like analytical, factual, and more like dramatic, emotional kind of lawyer with his presentation and with his interviewing. He's much more of a storyteller. I like his style when he's interviewing witnesses because he's not dumb. He knows the facts he needs to talk about and the information he needs to extrapolate, but he's also not he's not doing it in a way that's going to go over people's head. He's making it real. He's bringing it from information into reality. I don't like him being all up in the witness's personal space. He did it more than he should have. He didn't ask for permission before approaching witnesses. That was another thing that was a touch too common in this courtroom. Just like they didn't do objections. They also were just like walking all over the place and not respecting the well of the distance between the judge and the witness and the prosecutor, the defense, the defendant, just you need that distance. That's respect, but it's also safety. He was a little hands-on with the witnesses, like touching women, especially in the arms and the shoulders and stuff. And I'm like, please don't touch anybody, witnesses, but especially when you're touching women the most, it's a little weird. You got to stop that, dude. It's 2023. We're over that. He's dramatic, but it's in a fashion that feels regionally appropriate and relatable to me. And he did that in small doses, I felt like, when it was appropriate. He wasn't the entire time play acting and, like, emoting it up. So I think he knew that that's his strength, and he, uh, he did a good job balancing when he did that. I think he was a wise choice for the rebuttal. He was good at humanizing the trial, the witnesses, and the choice that the jury needed to make at the end of the day. However, I do think that he fucked up big time because what I've been talking about with Alex's history of financial crimes being brought into this trial, um, that happened because early on, the defense was making a lot of points with the witnesses that were brought in that, oh, Alex is such a nice guy. He's such a great father, such a great husband. He would never kill his son and his wife. He just wouldn't. He's not that kind of guy. And so by bringing up his character so much, Creighton Waters basically said if he's going to make his defense Alex's character, then we need to be allowed to bring in evidence about Alex's character, which these financial crimes were crimes that displayed Alex's character, displayed him lying, stealing, deceiving even the most vulnerable of people. People who had nothing, he found a way to steal from. So, all along, the defense objected to that, which because they were like, it's too unrelated. These are all different crimes. You can't bring in what's called propensity evidence, which I'm not a lawyer. I might be fucking this up the way I'm explaining it, but basically, you can't bring in other crimes that people have been convicted of or that are pending and say, see, because he stole a candy bar from 7-Eleven when he was 19, that means that he killed this person now when he was 20 because he's just a bad guy with a bad attitude and bad morals. Like that's called propensity evidence, and you can't do that because one does not equal the other. But because they put it that first of all, the defense opened the door to that coming in by talking so much about character and that these crimes are evidence of character. And by putting it under the cloak of character, they were able to talk about it. But there's reasonable grounds for appeal there. That's inevitably what's going to happen. The defense has said in their press statement that they're going to appeal this conviction, and they're going to appeal it on the grounds of those financial crimes being brought in and being more prejudicial than probative, which is rather than just being a display about Alex's character and talking about how that relates to this current crime, they're going to argue that it was more prejudicial, which is where you just make the jury think that this is a bad guy. So because he's a bad guy, he also did this bad thing, which is not necessarily the case. You can be a bad guy, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily are going to, hit a person with your car on purpose. It's two different things. Um so where Matters fucked up in his closing argument was he said that they brought in all of these financial crimes to prove motive and character. But at the end of the day, it's not the prosecution's job to prove motive. So by saying that, he's like, we don't even have to prove motive, but we did because this is what we think the motive was. And I'm like, that's so nice. If you didn't have to do it, you shouldn't have said that. If you were going to do it anyway, because now, and this is what Poot said in the press conference. He's like, oh, have a good day, have fun at work if you can. um, by kind of letting slip and reminding the jury that it's not even our job to prove motive, But we went to all this work and spent 2 extra weeks talking about this guy's character as a form of explaining motive to you. um, the defense is going to say, well, why? In their appeal, they're going to say, why would you take all of this time and spend all of this time and money and resources making the jurors stay for 2 extra weeks, bringing all of these people in, flying them in from God knows all over to testify about this stuff when you didn't even have to? That leans it toward being more prejudicial than probative. So that is something where when I heard Metters say that in his closing, I was like, that sentence should not have come out of your mouth, because it undercuts the whole thing that you just did. The 2 weeks of evidence that you made the jury sit through, you just undercut it by saying they didn't have to do that. Then why did you? I don't. Come on, man. So that it gives more veracity, or like more strength to the appeal that is inevitably going to be brought. So I think that was a big fuck up. Matters is nice. I enjoy watching him, but I wouldn't have done that if I was him. Um, the South Carolina Attorney General for the whole state dropped in to cross-examine one of the witnesses, and I thought he was a great lawyer. I don't remember his name. If you're from South Carolina, you probably know. I don't know. Seems like a nice guy and a good lawyer. He was only there for one cross-examination, but he did a great job. Finally, the last lawyer I want to talk about is Savannah Good, who was the prosecution's female lawyer, who I think she must be newer or younger, because she did less than everybody else. Like Barber on the defense team did less of the actual examinations and cross examinations. He just had less time on the stage, if you will. Savannah also had like less time on the stage, but both Savannah and Barber were younger than the rest of their cohorts. So it's kind of like, in a murder trial, you let the more experienced people lead the way. But Savannah was great with, first of all, she was very relatable and approachable. She has this very distinct Southern accent that as soon as you hear her start talking, you're like, oh, this is a person that I like. And then by far, her best moment was the cross-examination of Timothy Palmback, who was this expert witness from Connecticut, where, hey, I'm from Connecticut. He came in on when the defense was presenting their case to talk about the crime scene and talk about how, like, the prosecution had a crime scene reconstructionist come in to basically walk people through how the crimes would have happened that night. And then Timothy Palmback came in to offer his opinion, the defense's theory of how it would have happened. He said there had to have been 2 shooters. He said that they had to have shot Paul from a very different angle than what the prosecution was proposing. And he just was telling a very different story of the events than what the prosecution put up as this is what we think happened. So when Savannah gets up to cross-examine him after this very scientific, very smart guy who's a professor at University of New Haven, or at least he was, one thing that Savannah is good at is playing dumb at the right times. And I think that she plays into sexism a little bit. She's not that she is sexist, but she uses it to her advantage at times when she's working with a bunch of men. Hey, 20 viewers. So she would just make what Palmback was saying. When he said it, it sounded very smart and scientific and like the only way it could have happened. But when she put it in layman's terms, it sounded idiotic. Like she was like, so you're saying the shot went down, but what was it? But the blood and the body matter went up, which was what the guy had proposed. And as soon as she puts it in those terms, you're like, yeah, that doesn't sound it doesn't sound reasonable. So I love it when she would do stuff like that. She had a lot of moments like that throughout because she had a couple of experts, I think, that she was interviewing. So I think that she's got a bright future ahead of her as well as Barbara on the defense team. She got very technical people to simplify very technical subjects for the jury. She's also the person who has gotten memed and gone viral all over Twitter for her faces during Jim's closing argument. You can see the appall and disgust and frustration on her face at everything that Jim was saying. Very love her. She also dressed very well. Um, One more thing that I'm gonna end on because I have to leave for work in about 10 minutes. But I'm gonna end the live a little before then. Um, I've talked about for overall stuff about the trial. I thought there should have been more objections from both sides. I think it was weird that there wasn't, but I guess what I've heard is that that's a South Carolina regionalism. I've talked about how SLED definitely had some issues, but I think that they ultimately were able to get to what they needed to get to. I've talked about the issues with financial motive, um, and like why I think they did that, how I think they ended up shooting themselves in the foot during Metter's rebuttal closing, whatever. The last thing that did rub me the wrong fucking way was the prosecution did a press conference right after the jury verdict because the jury took a very short time deliberating this verdict. It was 3 hours after the jury left the courtroom before they were calling everybody back saying, "We have a verdict." And 2 jurors have since talked to the media about the process and their decision, and they've said really it took them about an hour to come to their decision. Everything else before and after that time period was like paperwork, moving all the evidence into the room, you know, that kind of boring stuff, getting all the media gathered together so they could read the verdict at the end and stuff. So really it was about an hour, which is incredibly fast for them to come to the decision that the prosecution was correct. This guy has done these crimes. We, the finders of fact, find it to be factual that Alec Murdaugh killed his wife and son. And after the verdict was delivered, which was a pretty quick, you know, it was just a few minutes, they read the jury forms. They talked about when do you want to do sentencing, and then they set everybody on their way. The prosecution did a victory speech press conference, which was very off-putting to me. Because again, as I mentioned earlier on, this is not something that is like a a positive thing to be right about. Like this is where it feels again like it's gamesmanship, it's teams, it's not like justice is served in the end, but also God, it feels gross when you're so excited that you won that that's what you're talking about at the press conference and you're giving out thank yous like this is an Oscar acceptance speech instead of saying, "We have justice for Maggie and Paul. We worked really hard. The work paid off. We are so happy that Maggie and Paul can have all those questions answered. You know, we're going to hopefully have some closure and healing for the community." It was so focused on them and it was so grandstandy and just like insensitive and gross. Because again, like I was on board with their theory of the case. I believed that they were correct and that Alec had um had done the crimes, right? But once, you know, you get me to agree with you, and then you throw a fucking party about the fact that hooray, we're right. This guy did kill his wife and his son. It's like, No, that's not something to celebrate being right about. I mean, like, in a way it is because you're taking this murderer off the streets of your city and keeping the community safe. But also it's like, God, what a sad thing. And I just wish that they had treated the moment with some more gravity and sensitivity and just respect, not just again for the victims, but for the community. This community is small, it's close knit. So many of them came in to testify. Everybody has been traumatized by this thing. So the the hip hoorays about you being correct does not feel appropriate when everybody else is processing fucking trauma. This didn't happen that long ago. This was June of 21. It's not even been 2 years. And I don't know, man. I did not like that. And like a lot of the respect that I had for the prosecution team went out the window when they started doing that shit. Um yeah, I think that a lot of it was again, it's like this big good old boys club family dynasty that they've dismantled, that they've been trying for a long time to dismantle. And like I understand you won, you've got adrenaline in you. Um, maybe go find a soundproof room to go cheer and hug, and then go face the community at a press conference with some dignity and respect and understanding for what they've been through with this. I understand that this team went through a lot, but so did the community. I don't know. It was very distasteful. And I'm actually surprised that the defense in their press conference did not make more of a thing about how disrespectful the prosecution's press conference was. Cuz like you won your case, you earned the win, but you don't earn gloating over the fact that somebody killed their wife and their son. Come on. Come on. Come on, man. Y'all are smarter than that. Um Anyways, so I've got to get running. I'm going to read some final comments and then I'm going to get going. But those were most of my thoughts from the trial. Those were the things that impacted me the most. And I just wanted to get on here and chat with you guys about it because I've been watching this trial for the whole time it was happening. It has distracted me a bit from my editing. So I figure if I'm gonna postpone my next Logan Paul video so that I can watch this, I should at least mention something about it on my channel. After the Logan Paul video, I think I do want to switch stuff up a bit and stream more so that I can get to more things in the moment rather than waiting to build these gigantic videos that, especially if they're not going to get as many views as I thought they were going to get. So, uh, thank you for commenting. Thank you for liking the stream. Maybe share it just in case, because I think my lives don't really get as much traction as my videos. It was such a shock to the jury. They couldn't even understand where the timeline was coming from based on the evidence they saw. Yeah. And they were annoyed that the prosecution didn't lay it out from the start. Yes. And the guy walked. Wait, sorry. Is this something like this in a kidnapping trial? I got you. The trial was so long and felt like that prosecution had nothing until their closing arguments. And then the jury was mad at them. And then the guy ended up walking. Yeah, that's the risk. Thanks for a morning live off to work. Thank you, Coffee and Cats. This is a good time for me, honestly, mornings. So let me know if we want to do more wake up lives. Love your channel. Thank you, Michelle. Gotta go. Bye, Anne. I agree the objections were strategic. I also heard the lawyers say that they had agreed to limit leading objections just to keep the trial moving quicker. That's a choice. I don't know, man. I mean, if that's what happened, that's what happened. But I wouldn't. I wouldn't make that choice. But I'm no lawyer. I'm just Little old me. Because it's a good old boys club, and this was personal. That's why we listen to so much financials too, I think. Yeah. Um, okay. All right, guys. Well, that's what I've got on this trial. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm gonna sign off because I gotta go to work like now. I'm supposed to be in the car. So I'll see you guys someday with a video or a live stream or something. Set your notifications to all so you can see when I'm popping on. And thank you so much for watching. So much love. What do I say? Peace be with you always. Bye. Have a great day.